This video is our first look at the Cartesian coordinate system, or what you might call graphing. When graphing in an XY coordinate plane, the first thing you're going to need to do is draw your x-axis and your y-axis. The x-axis is like a number line that goes side to side, and the y-axis is also like a number line, but it goes up and down. It divides the graph into 4 quadrants that we would label quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. To plot points in an XY coordinate plane, you use an ordered pair x, y. In our graph, we have a point that is labeled point P, and it is the coordinate point 3, 5. The 3 is in the x direction, so they have gone 3 on the x-axis. The 5 is the y direction, so they have gone up 5 in the y direction to plot that point. Let's try some. Let's plot these 3 points and name the quadrant that they are in. The first point is 3, -4. So we're going to go 3 in the x direction. That's this way, over 3. And then we are going to go -4 in the y direction, which means down -4. So if we go over 3 and down 4, we are right here. So that is point A. We'll label it with that. The question now is, which quadrant are we in? Well, this is quadrant 1, 2, 3, and our point is over here in quadrant 4. Point B is -2, 1. So we are going to go -2 in the x direction. That puts me this way, right here. And +1 in the y direction. So we are going to be right here for point B. And that means point B is in quadrant 2. Our last point is 0, 4. 0 in the x spot means we're not going side to side at all, but we are going to go 4 in the y direction. So we're going to go up 4, and this would be point C. Now we have to name the quadrant, and that one's kind of tricky because he's not in any of the 4 quadrants. He's on one of the axes. He's actually on the y-axis. So for his quadrant, we would just say none. He is not in a quadrant. He's on an axis. Let's take a look at example 2. We're asked to complete the XY table for this equation, 2x minus 5y equals 8. Over on the XY table, we already have 2 numbers put in their spots. This -2 is in the y column. So that means they want us to find the x when y is equal to -2. 4 is in the x spot, so we want to know what's the y when we put 4 in the x spot. First up, let's do the -2. That -2 is in the y column. So we're going to come over here to this equation, and wherever we see this y, we're going to swap it out for the -2. So we're going to have 2x minus, and instead of 5y, it's 5 times -2 now. And we're going to need to simplify and solve for x. First up, I'm going to go ahead and multiply these guys. A negative times a negative is going to make that +10. To solve for x, we would minus the 10 to the other side. So we're going to get 2x equals -2. To get x by itself, we need to divide both sides by 2. We're going to get x equals -1. What that means is when y is equal to -2, x must be -1. It also means that the point -1, -2 is a solution to this equation. If we were to graph this line, which we'll get to in a later video, we would see this point would be on that line. Now let's do the next one. The next one has a 4, but it's in the x spot. So we're going to rewrite the equation again, but instead of x, we're going to put in 4. Now we're putting the y back in. We're going back to the original equation. The only thing we're swapping out now is 4 in the spot of x. We're going to simplify and solve for y. So 2 times 4 is 8. To solve for y, I need to move this 8, so I'm going to subtract 8. I'm going to get -5y. And over here, these cancel out as well, but I have to put a number here because I can't just have nothing there. But 8 minus 8, the number for that would be 0. Divide by our -5. And we're going to get y equals 0. So when x is 4, we know that y is 0. Which tells us 4, 0 is also a point that would be on this line. Number 3 is a similar question, but it's worded differently. Here, we're given an equation. We're also given a point. The question is, does that point work for this equation? If I were to graph this line, would this be on the line? We can actually do that without having to graph the line. Remember, this is our x number, and this is our y number. So I am going to put that x and y value back over here in the equation where I see x and y. The y is 7. The x is -2. Remember when we say 4x, that means multiply, so 4 times -2. And let's simplify and see what happens. 7 over here I can't do anything with, but I'm going to go ahead and multiply these guys. That'll be -8 minus 1. And -8 minus 1 is -9. 7 does not equal -9. This is a false statement, which means this point is not a solution to this equation. In order for that to have been a solution, these guys would have had to come out to be equal. You could also do this a different way. You could put this in for x and see what you get for y. If you get 7, you know it worked. You could put this in for y and see what you get for x. If you get -2, then it works. Anything outside of that, your answer to this is going to be no.